A sketch of the life of Absolom Wamsley Smith, contributed by Andy Jandency 1. A sketch of the life of Absolom Wamsley Smith, from his diary and memoirs of his son Heber Smith. I was born in the year of our Lord 1819 in Harrison County, West Virginia, on the 22nd day of June. My father was Jacob Smith and my mother Anna Wamsley. My grandfather, Aaron Smith, was born March 23, 1753, and his wife Sarah Allen was born April 3, 1753. They were married in 1772. Shortly after they were married, they settled on Simpson's Creek, which is 1½ miles from the mouth where it empties in the West Fork of the river. It being a new country, they had to begin making them a home, and the first thing to be done was to build a log cabin to live in. Sometime after the house was finished, while grandfather was away some distance at work in the timber, a large brown bear scented some fresh meat grandmother was cooking and came to the house. The door being shut, the bear went to the chimney and started to climb up. Fortunately, there was a gun in the house, and grandmother, being a woman of great courage, took the gun and went out and shot at the bear. She hit it and succeeded in driving it away. They had a large family and lived at the same place until they passed away. My father settled on land joining grandfather's farm on the creek. His land contained 90 acres and was covered with heavy timber, a portion of the land being on the creek bottom. The timber was mostly sugar maple mixed occasionally with black walnut, hickory, and chestnut, with sycamores bordering the creek. On the upland were white, red, black, and chestnut oaks, yellow and white poplars, hickory, beech, and a great many other varieties too numerous to mention. This land was given to father when he was 21 years old by grandfather to make him a home. Soon after that he was married, and he started his labors on the new farm. It was so heavily timbered that progress was very slow. The oldest child being a daughter, father had no help until I was old enough to work, as I was the second child. When I was old enough to work, father had at least half of his land under cultivation, and when I was 12 years old he bought another farm. About November 13, 1833, my brother and I were returning from a corn shucking about 11 o'clock at night, when I noticed a number of stars falling from the heavens in the southeast direction. We watched them for a few minutes, and they increased very fast. We were greatly excited over the strange sight, but we went on home. The stars continued to fall, and we went to bed without informing father of the peculiar occurrence, with the intention of getting up after taking a short sleep. At about 2 o'clock in the morning I arose and went out, and the stars or meteors were still falling, so I called father and the rest of the family, and they were greatly surprised at the strange spectacle. Many of the neighbors saw it, and some were greatly frightened, saying that it was the end of the world. The spectacle continued until daylight. In 1836, my older sister Delilah got married to a young man by the name of Solomon Shin. They left in April for Illinois. This was a heavy blow to mother, as her health was poor, and I think it served to shorten her days. She died in 1837. After the death of mother, the home was left without a housekeeper, and I felt that all the charms of home were gone, so I resolved to go to Illinois, where my sister was living in Quincy, Adams County, as soon as I could get a good chance. I was then 16 years old and had never been over 20 miles from home in my life. Father married again the coming fall, so home was made more agreeable, and I decided to stay until my sister returned on a visit, which she promised to do in 2 years from the time she left. I continued to assist my father on the farm and went to school in the winter until the spring of 1838. I will now describe the schoolhouse which I attended. The building was of rough logs about 18 by 20 feet square, covered with what we called clapboards in that country. It had a large door in one end and a fireplace in the other, about 6 feet wide for burning logs. Our seats were made of rough slats with 4 legs to hold them up to a proper height for scats without any backs. There were long, narrow windows on the sides of the house, nearly the whole length of the building. They were made by cutting one log out of the wall on either side. This would leave room for a glass. When it was finished, it would be 1 foot by 18 feet in length. Under these windows were the writing desks, made by boring large holes in a log the proper height under the windows on each side of the house, then inserting long pins of wood 18 inches long to support the boards that formed the desks. The girls sat on one side of the room and the boys on the other. The books I used were the Old Webster's Spelling Book, the English and National Reader, and Pike's Arithmetic. I also had a slate and pencils, paper, and goose quill pens. This formed my equipment for school. The equipment was very different from the privileges and blessings our children have in getting an education at the present time, 1893. I only had the chance of going about 3 months a year, which was during the winter season. I had this privilege for 4 or 5 years from the time I was 12 years to about 17. I decided in 1808 to go to Illinois in the spring, as my sister had returned in the fall previous with her husband and 1 child. My sister came back with the intention of keeping house for father, not knowing father had married again until she got back home. After learning that father was in better condition for getting along than they expected, they decided to go back in the spring. About the 19th of March, my sister's husband began preparations for going home, and I spoke to him about going with him. He asked me if I had father's consent. I told him I not yet, but I expected to get it if I went, so Mr. Shin said it would be all right with him. Soon after that I asked father if he had any objections to my going with my sister to Illinois. He said he thought I was very young to leave home, but I told him I thought I could take care of myself. Father finally consented to my going west, and then came my hardest trial, leaving my relatives and young associates in life and going among strangers, but I still felt impressed to go in search of better country. The preparations then for starting on a journey of 700 miles was very different than it is now. No railroads were to be traveled on, wagons and carriages were very scarce, and roads were very bad. Consequently, most of the traveling was done on horseback. We had 50 miles to travel by land before we could get on a steamboat. We decided to travel 50 miles on horseback. We left on the 11th of April, 1838. I was then 18 years old. Father gave Mr. Shin and my sister money to pay my expenses. The great desire of parents for the welfare of their children was strongly manifest in the course father adopted for my benefit. Young people cannot realize the fact until they become parents themselves, for I thought father very peculiar in not letting me have the money and letting Mr. Shin take care of it. I reasoned this way to myself: father never had known me to drink, gamble, or associate with bad company in any form, but there was another side. I hadn't had enough experience yet in the world to handle much money, and father looked at the many temptations which lay before me in traveling by water on the great Mississippi and Ohio rivers to Quincy, Illinois. I have long since acknowledged father's wisdom in the course he pursued. After bidding farewell to family, friends, and associates, we left on our 50-mile trip over rough country. The party consisted of 5, namely Mr. Shin, my sister, their child, my younger brother, and myself. My brother was to bring the horses back when we got to the Ohio River, which lay directly west. Our first day's travel was up a small winding stream by the name of Rock Camp, a tributary of the West Fork of the Monongahela River. Our course lay through heavy timber with a small farm here and there that had been made in the small laterals in the creek. After stopping for noon, we traveled on until near night, stopping at one of Mr. Shin's relatives having the same name. I was greatly surprised to hear that we had traveled only about 14 miles that day, but we were all tired enough to stop for the night. We were made welcome at Mr. Shin's and treated with the greatest kindness. After breakfast the next morning, we bid farewell to Mr. Shin and again started on our journey. We soon reached the summit of the main divide between the Monongahela and Ohio rivers, and soon the head of a small river called Middle Slant. Our course lay down the stream for about 25 miles through heavy pine timber, except here and there where small farms had been cleared out on the stream. The country at this time was very new and thinly settled, and this part of the road was only traveled by horseback. But as we traveled down the river, the country opened out, and by noon we had reached some nice farmers who directed us to a wagon road. Previous to this, we heard of a mill that was on the road. The mill was called the Dug Handle Mill. We inquired concerning it because our curiosity was greatly aroused, for we wanted to see it and find out why it was named such a peculiar name. We found it was 5 or 6 miles farther. When we reached it, we could tell at a glance why the peculiar name originated. It was a water power mill on the river. The river formed a bend which was said to be 7 miles around and came back near the same place, with only a ridge of rocks about 10 rods between the river in the two places through this ridge of rocks. That night we reached a town by the name of Middleborough, which was just 10 miles from the Ohio River. The next day we arrived at the Ohio River about noon. After getting dinner and bidding goodbye to my brother, we hailed the first steamboat that came down the river. We had to go down the Ohio River, then up the Mississippi. We arrived at Quincy the morning of the 22nd and went to Mr. Shin's father's, where we stayed overnight. The next morning we procured a team and went to Payson, which was 6 miles south, where I expected to make my future home. The following summer I worked for Mr. Shin on his farm, and in the fall I leased 20 acres of land from David Shin, a brother to my brother-in-law. I leased the land for 3 years for fencing 3 sides and breaking the soil up. It was prairie and hard to break. I had it fenced by May, and by the 1st of June I had the soil broken and planted in corn. I then went to breaking prairie for others until harvest time. The price for breaking prairie was $3 to $4 per acre. I worked through harvest, hauling, and threshing until September. Corn planted in sod needs little cultivation, so I had nothing to do on my land until my corn got ripe. I had a good crop for sod corn. In September I cut and hauled my corn and then plowed the 20 acres and put it in fall wheat. I will state here that the Latter-day Saints had been driven from the state of Missouri late in the fall of 1838. Joseph Smith and 5 others were arrested and put in prison in Independence, Missouri. The remainder of the Saints were driven out by a mob in the winter. They came to Illinois early in the spring of 1839, many of them coming to Quincy. Many of the old acquaintances that had joined the church in Virginia had moved to the west. Joseph and the other prisoners came later in the spring. The Mormons were all very destitute, but the people of Illinois were very kind to them, giving them work and renting and leasing land to them. These Latter-day Saint people proved to be very industrious. The elders of this church began preaching throughout the state, and people started to investigate the doctrines which they preached, and many joined the church. In 1839, Nelson, a sectarian minister of the Nelson Institute near Burton, a small town 8 miles west of Quincy, challenged Joseph Smith to a debate on doctrinal points, taking the Word of God for fair guidance. Joseph Smith accepted it, and arrangements for a debate in Quincy were made in a large chapel, but finding the crowd to be too large for the hall, they moved the meeting to a grove in the east part of town. It was there I first saw the prophet. In the spring of 1839, I again went to breaking prairie sod until harvest. Then I changed my boarding place from my sister's to James Rollins. When harvest came, I had a fine crop of wheat, about 400 bushels. After harvest came, and I had all of the threshing done, I started to plow my land for corn in the spring. I had a very good crop of corn the next harvest. I was now 21 years of age, and this was the last year of my lease. I had thought for some time that I should have a companion. I had become acquainted with Emily Downs, and I married her November 5, 1840. Thus far the material was from his diary, but the remainder is from memoirs of his son. Father and mother moved to a farm which he had purchased. A few years after their marriage, mother became greatly interested in Mormon doctrine, as did the majority of her family. She greatly desired to come to Utah with the Saints, but father wanted to go to Texas, which was at this time a new state, and great promises were made to those who would go. The outlook appeared very bright for prosperity. Due to the desires and encouragement of mother, he began the investigation of the church and became a member. He was baptized in August 1843 by Isaac M. Stewart in Adams County. Soon after, he was ordained a teacher in the Aaronic priesthood, and in the fall of 1848 he was ordained a 70 in the 23rd Quorum in Nauvoo by Brother Wells, then the president of that quorum. Much to the joy of mother, he decided that they would come to Utah. They came in the camp wagon with few possessions, as did the other saints. They arrived in the year 1852 with the Isaac M. Stewart Company. He came directly to Draper and began farming. He did much in helping to build up this community in the way of road construction and other community accomplishments. After his coming to Utah, he went back to his old home on two 6-month missions, one in 1864 and the other in 1874. He relates in his diary the changes in the old community and his happiness at seeing his old friends and relatives again. He had a large home consisting of 14 rooms down on the state highway, and it was used as an inn for travelers. It was here that Dr. Park stopped when on his way to California. He was out of money at the time and inquired of my father where he could get a job. After conversing with him, Father found him to be very well educated. As Father was a trustee at this time, he aided him in obtaining a school in Draper. Dr. Park in this way became a founder of education in Draper. He later became superintendent of the University of Utah. Porter Rockwell often called when on scouting trips, and so did other prominent leaders of the church when traveling. Our home also served as a stage station. Father and Mr. Stewart had a molasses mill in the eastern part of Draper where they ground cane to make molasses for people in the community. The power for the mill was obtained from a water wheel on Willow Creek. He ran this for 8 to 10 years. Then they deserted it. He studied the Bible a great deal and was greatly interested in the travels and lives of the children of Israel. 2 of his favorite songs were Come, Come Ye Saints, and God Moves in a Mysterious Way. He was a natural mechanic and found it very easy to do anything along that line. He always had his own workshop and made such things as buggies, wagons, etc. He held many important positions in the community. He was a counselor to J. M. Stewart, being ordained April 1806. After coming to Utah, he took 4 women as his wives besides my mother. The names of these women were Catherine Cotterall, Caroline Vaughn, Mary and Osborne's, and Louisa Osborne. His posterity was numerous, he being the father of 32 children, whose posterity has scattered practically all over the North American continent. He was a man of sterling qualities, his word being as good as a note, and he always believed in absolute honesty. He was sought after a great deal for advice and counsel, which he administered with great wisdom. His habits were always above reproach, and he was never known to indulge in intoxicating drinks, tobacco, or even uncouth language. He was about 5 feet 8 inches tall, wore a beard clipped rather close to his face, and had white hair and dark blue eyes. He was a man of a serious nature and had rather a stern expression on his face. When he became an elderly man, he used a cane, which the following poem very aptly describes. Father's cane, only a gnarled and crooked stick, but this one is so genuine. Bent by the wind and storm, the sight fills my eyes with tears. But for years it has helped to carry, it will closely be connected with his feeble tottering form, his memory in after years. As we sit here today watching everyone knew dear Father, that loved life passing away, for just what he seemed to be. Life him I have been true and faithful, no outside show, always the same. It almost seems to say, in his just simplicity. Oh, yes, others stood by it. It seems so like an emblem, more beautiful to see of his life, so firm and brave. One from faraway England, in fancy I see his hand resting. It glitters with brilliancy on the cane that nature gave. Emma Shipley. Father was ordained a patriarch on August 21st, 1898, by Joseph F. Smith. He lived to be the age of 85 years, passing away in the year of 1904. He was honored and respected by all who had the privilege of making his acquaintance. As I remember my father, Absolom W. Smith, by Bert L. Smith. When I was born, my father was 62 years of age. Because of this, I remember him as a man advancing in years. He was about 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed around 150 pounds. He had medium gray eyes. My first recollection of him was when he stood in our kitchen. He was talking to the members of the family about the marriage of his daughter, Eliza, to George Rust, who soon returned with his bride to Southeast Utah, his home. That was about 1888. A more vivid picture comes to me some 2 years later when father had returned from Hanksville, Emery Company. He had gone to Hanksville to put distance between him and Salt Lake City, where the U.S. Marshal and his helpers were rounding up the polygamists. He paid us a visit in the fall and stayed for a short time. When he left, he decided to take my brother Sam with him. I should explain that while Aunt Mary and the fourth wife and father were in Hanksville, mother and we kids were staying in the big house located near the Draper Road on State Street. When father visited us in the fall, he usually brought us a barrel of molasses and some cornmeal and would take back merchandise that was more accessible in Salt Lake City and needed at their new home. I am sure that mother was very much upset at the thought of Sam's leaving. Father had visited around this crisp spring morning as he was getting ready to leave. He impressed me as a man of strong will and determination. I was likely more impressed at my age than I would have been had not Sam been waiting to get in the wagon with him and leave us. Father finally hitched up his team to the wagon. The team had been resting for some time and was full of life. I remember that the horses ran and jumped and mother thought that it was dangerous for a 9-year-old boy to go along. Father insisted that the horses were perfectly safe and just to prove it let them run like wildfire. I was only 6 when all this happened. Soon he returned with the horses all quieted down and they were on their way. The following of time until father returned was anything but pleasant. The condition of the farm, which I will discuss later, was such that crops produced for cash were almost nil. In addition to the molasses and cornmeal that father brought up from the south, we produced meat, eggs, milk, and grain for flour. This represented the food for that era. While in Hanksville, father built a small house and had some land under cultivation. It was his belief that everyone should assist in community improvement. He did much work on the small house that was used for church and school. He also was interested in getting water out of the muddy river for the community. Our house in Draper consisted of a very large 2-story house and also a large barn, 200 acres of land on 3 sides of the Draper Riverton Road at State Street. We also had 150 acres on the Jordan River. The farmland on State Street gradually went to alkali, and except for small spots, it was temporarily valueless for production of farm commodities. Soon after the manifesto was signed in 1890, father disposed of his holdings in Hanksville and returned to Draper. After he returned, he mapped out a plan to reclaim the land by digging open drain ditches and keeping the water table down. Father was now over 70 years old, and we ranged from 10 to 16 years, so not much was accomplished in this direction. To say that our economic conditions were impaired would be putting it mildly. To show how really low the standards of living were, and to include the West generally would be only fair, we raised a large acreage of potatoes one year down on the Jordan farm. We sold a railroad car of potatoes through Mr. Rideout's store. He furnished the sacks, and we delivered the potatoes to the railroad. A car of potatoes would weigh in the neighborhood of 25 tons. When father got the returns after freight and bags were paid for, there was enough money left to buy 5 suits of clothes, knee pants, with shoes, hats, and socks, which represented between $50 and $60. Today, those potatoes would have a value of from $750 to $1,000. Father was a quiet man, rather stern in his appearance, but agreeable in the main. We 5 boys near the same age enjoyed our sports and games. We had a large apple orchard near the house, in which we set up a croquet set. As soon as dinner was over, we were off to play croquet. Father was getting along in years and felt he needed a short rest after dinner, which he enjoyed each day. After the rest, he would come to the edge of the orchard and shout, "Boys, it is time to go to work." There was something about his voice that carried finality without any slang or profanity. May I say that on a hot July day the urge comes to young boys to loaf around and waste a little time, but not so with us. His voice cleared the air of any doubt, and we were ready to go to work. Father was always an early riser. During the cropping season down on the Jordan farm, which was 2.5 miles from home, father would go down to take care of the irrigation at 3 o'clock in the morning. He would return about 7 o'clock. This would give him an opportunity to encourage us boys in the line of our duties. Very often this was essential. If I were to undertake to say what gave him such decided influence over us boys, it would be that he got a great deal of experience raising a large family early in life. Only once can I remember him taking a switch to me for not paying attention to details. He had asked me to put the calves in the calf pasture, and I had put them in the yard. He seemed to have the quality of knowing how much to say and how to say it, further than that he did little talking. He was not the visiting type, however he did enjoy sitting around with the family and neighbors, but let them do most of the talking. His natural disposition must have been helpful in guiding his children without the use of the rod. His teachings were done almost entirely by example. As I look back, I am impressed with the respect with which he held by his family, his neighbors, and the community at large. He was always fair with other people and believed that one should treat others as they would like to be treated. I recall that when the neighbor's cattle did get into our field, if it was the first time, he would say that accidents will happen, but it must not become a habit. If they continued to bother us, the owner would have to pay for damages, as father would expect to pay if his cattle did damage to them under similar circumstances. I recall one of his nieces visiting us for some time in the winter. She was a school teacher who lived in the East. She told many stories and jokes and read from books. That was the one time I remember father laughing a great deal. He would laugh until the tears came, but no noise was heard. He and I were down on the river farm for the purpose of planting turnips. We were going to broadcast the seed, and he asked me to bring him a bucket of sand. When I asked him what he was going to do with it, he said he was going to plant it. Later he explained that adding sand kept the seed from being too thick on the ground. He attended church regularly and was always interested in community betterment. He was active in a limited way right up to within 3 months of his death, which occurred at 84. When father felt that the end was near, he asked a representative from each part of his family to get together and divide his property. There was an attorney's son in the group. They reached an agreeable decision in 1 day's time. There was considerable property, but it did not have much money value at the time. One farm recently sold for $50,000. Father was sick for 3 months before the end came. Several of the children took turns sitting with him. Some of the older boys were so impressed with his life that they caused the immortal words of the poet to be placed upon his tombstone. His life was so gentle and the elements so mixed in him that nature might say to all the world, "This is an honest man."